Welcome to Mark My Words, a podcast that not only aims to inspire and teach the listener about entrepreneurship, it also aims to give my guests an opportunity to talk about their unique journey in entrepreneurship and life. So join me and my guests as we meet at the crossroads on Mark My Words. So, do you find yourself struggling to unlock your pet's full potential? Do you feel like you're falling short of creating a well-behaved companion, the one that you envision that is always good and attentive and listens? My guest today, Brady Foulk, was in a similar position at one point. Apparently, according to one of his bios, he says that he hit rock bottom. And I can't imagine where rock bottom would be, but apparently Brady knows, and it inspired him to become founder and head dog trainer at New Direction Dog Training. And I say, welcome Brady Folk to Mark My Words. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Mark. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, rock bottom smells terrible. I'll tell you that. And I'll get into the full story later, but take it from me. You don't want it.
Well,
Get
I
out
know
before.
I know as a person, I feel like I've hit rock bottom a few times in life. I mean, I went through a divorce many years ago. That was pretty, I felt like I was pretty rock bottom, but I think, I think we're alluding to something a little bit different, hopefully. But, so I'll let
Yeah.
you explain that before we get into just your path as a person. So, what was rock bottom for you?
Yeah, rock bottom for me. And I think rock bottoms are great because they inspire action. You gotta crawl out of it. I remember I came home and the first thing that hit me was the smell, like I mentioned. Uh, Terrible, terrible smell. If you've ever smelled dog poop before, that was the first thing that hit me. And I opened up the door, and of course, there was like four piles of poop. And I knew it was bad because like he even pooped on one of his bones. And I was like,
Oh,
oh man, like, why'd you do that to yourself? There's so many other spots you could go.
that is
Um,
bad.
I
Continue.
know, right? And this is like I had left him for like an hour and a half, 2 hours to go out with friends, and he was like maybe 7 months old at the time, and he hated his crate, so I couldn't leave him in his crate because he would just bark and bark and bark. And we were in a small apartment by the beach in San Diego, and uh, I looked down, and the next thing I saw was like a chunk of my carpet missing, and I was like, well, there's a few $100s to the deposit gone. And then in the closet, I look over and there's like a shredded box. And I was like, oh no, what was that? And I got my dad a leather duffel bag, and he ripped through like the box inside of a box inside of a box to get to this duffel bag. And my new book, my Tim Ferriss Tools of Titans book, was like the first 30 pages were like shredded out. I was like, why didn't you rip up my old book? Like this one? So at that point, I had to go to Home Depot and go get a carpet cleaner and clean everything. And I was like, well, I really need to figure out this crate training thing because like it's kind of dangerous. I don't know how much of the carpet he actually ate. And it's like expensive. I'd rather have spent the money on a trainer than I would have like paying to fix up my carpet now and renting this carpet cleaner for the next day. And not to mention all the time that it takes to clean your carpet and like get that smell out. Like oh man, terrible. Um, so I found a woman named Susan Garrett, and she's a world agility champion from Canada. And she's done this with not just one dog, but with multiple dogs, 7 dogs, I believe. And I paid her money. I invested money to learn how to crate train my dog, how to teach him how to come when called with the recallers program, how to teach him tit or tricks, how to do some agility stuff, like all sorts of different fun things. I've taught him how to get a water bottle out of the fridge and then shut the fridge door, right? Like I've taught a pig how to paint. I say all this not to impress you, but to impress upon you that animals are brilliant. I like to let people know that the average dog, may it be a Pomeranian or Chihuahua or a Border Collie or German Shepherd and anything in between, they can learn 165 words. So I have a feeling your dog can learn 20 or 30 words quite easily. You just don't know it yet. And that's why I'm here to share some insights and some tips and tricks for dog training and leadership and elegant leadership specifically.
Well, first of all, I actually cannot really smell hardly anything. So
Lucky you
I
in some ways.
most of the time I feel pretty lucky that I can't. And when I hear stories like this, I'm like, this is what my wife is telling me about all the time, that I'm lucky I can't smell. Because without, first of all, without her, I would really be in trouble because I need somebody to be able to smell. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't like the sight of poop. I don't think anybody really likes the sight of it. So definitely feel for
It was
you there.
terrible.
And that is definitely a rough story. And I'm sure that is not why you went to college for business administration. And I would actually be curious to know, and I shouldn't even say usually, I always ask this, what what were some things you were dreaming of before dog training, before maybe even going to college? Was being a business admin major something that you had your mind set on? Did you have any other thing that you wanted to do?
Yeah, I'm not a college graduate. I'm like three classes away from getting my associate's degree. I couldn't pass Spanish class.
Oh.
Um, and now my girlfriend's Colombian, so she helps translate everything for me. And like,
Oh,
we've been all over.
you could go
What?
back now. You could get it.
I could, I could. Um, so I thought about it. My parents get on me all the time to get it, but I went out and I got real life experience. I started working at In and Out. That was one of my first jobs, and then I went to Tiffany and Company, and I was selling jewelry there for a little while, and then Amazon as a packer, and that was a tough, hard job. And I went and worked at Apple for a little while, and that was fun. I learned a lot about leadership there, and then I was working at an insurance company. I was working, making good money there, and I'd been there for about 3 years, and it was the day after my birthday. We came back on like a Monday, and times are getting slow. It was towards the end of 2019, and they let me know that I was the last one hired, so I'm the first one to be laid off because business isn't going as good as they thought. So they let me go, and I was like, this is when Bumblebee was maybe like a year and a half old or so. So he was a little bit older from this previous story that I told. It had been a year, and at that point, I was helping friends and family with their dog and sharing some of the tips and tricks I learned for teaching them to come when called and crate training and teaching them rollover and all sorts of different tricks, right? And that was the moment that I was like, wow, okay, I'm gonna continue doing this and see if I can make more money from it. Or not even more money. I wasn't charging anything then, but I was started charging $25, and then I was started increasing my prices, but then COVID happened. So then I had to like pivot back to $25 lessons on Zoom, which is really interesting. But growing up, I just wanted to be a professional baseball player. And I played in college for a little bit. And then when I hurt my arm, hurt my legs, and I was like, nah, I can't do this like long term. So I need to go get a real job.
So the first thing I want to say is I always thought that first hired, first fired was either a really outdated kind of thing or was just a myth. I didn't realize some people actually practice that. I really
Yeah.
feel for you that they did that. I would think that like the first person that or the person with the longest tenure would be making like the most money and you want to try to cut some of those people, not the first person or the last person you hired, but
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I
I,
was It was small too. The company had 8 people in it. So, and they had all been there for years before me. Like I was like a recent like within 3 years still, but I was like one of the first people they hired after a while. And so they had their core group of people. Anyway, I'm not mad. It set me off on a totally different trajectory. I'm very happy I'm out of the company. There's some things you don't realize till you're out of a situation. You're like, oh, that was kind of toxic. I'm glad that I'm not there anymore.
Oh, I hear you. I had a few toxic work environments over the course of the last like 8 years or so. So I worked at the same company for 10 years once out of college. It was a great experience. I was offered a buyout package and moved
Nice.
on, kind of put myself out there in the world rather than risking it and staying where I was already on the list of the restructuring and all of that. So put myself out there, and what I saw at some places, I was just blown away by the toxicity. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes it's a blessing when you get removed or you decide to leave and you look back, you're like, yeah, I'm much better off. Everything happens for a reason, I think. So I
Yeah.
think you obviously have learned that and alluded to that, and I'm a believer in that too.
Yeah, we all got problems at some point. I'm glad I'm happy with the problems I got now. So now the current one is being able to expand and scale and expand beyond just me training dogs and have a facility and people to come to and utilizing my time a little bit more smartly. And these are new
So
problems.
So when you first left that job, and it kind of sounds like you were like basically thinking, okay, I'm going to charge X amount. Then you may or may not have done your research, and I feel like this is something that I might enjoy doing. I'm just gonna see where it goes. It doesn't sound like you really were like, well, I'm gonna have a business and I have a
Mm-mm.
structure. Doesn't sound that
Mm.
way at all. Talk a little bit about like just the roots and the progression of everything.
Yeah, I've always done real well with organic clients and referrals. So that's how a lot of it started. And people are like, can you just help me out? Like, what do you charge? And at that time, I had imposter syndrome. And I'm like, well, is this mother with 3 kids and a dog really going to listen to this 23-year-old? And I've done some work to realize that yes, and it is a blessing at my age. I bring vitality and I bring energy and I bring a different perspective to how I see things, and all are very valuable. And as I started first, because and also with dog training too, you got to realize it's you're training the dog, yes, and also the person. So you have to enjoy both communicating to the person and the dog. And at first, I liked talking to the dogs more than the people. And then I had to learn some skills of how to communicate better with them and help facilitate them transforming and becoming a trainer, not just Brady, like, how do I fix this, you know?
Did you take?
So,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You have a thought.
no,
I'm
go.
sorry.
No, no, you're totally good.
Okay, well then I'll I'll ask what I was gonna ask. Did you take anything away from some of the experiences you had leading up to it? You mentioned you learned something about leadership, and gotta imagine being in, working with people like In and Out Burger, you're dealing with customers and your fellow employees, and that's all. I've been in environments like that. It's very, very social. What did you learn? Did anything help you from those experiences to become a better communicator with your clients, with the dogs?
Yeah, working in and out or Apple and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they helped a whole bunch. Even Apple, a lot of the problems that come up, I may not have personally have experienced the problem, but when we were in training, they took us through an exercise and they would present us the problem, like someone broke their screen or their microphone's not working, whatever it may be, you know? And there was all the people who had been hired, and we would have to show an expression on our face showing like empathy and like what it would be like if that situation. We can't just be laughing at the customer, you know. So it teaches you like sensory acuity, like being aware, acutely aware of like what you're doing with your face and how you're expressing empathy. And then how to help and guide customers, especially a little bit older customers, to solve their own problems and directing them what to do instead of you just taking their phone and being like beep boop bop beep boop and then like fixing it, like here, there you go. Like actually like, okay, can you take the time to like go into your settings and then scroll down and like get this one? We're doing it with a little bit more enthusiasm too. And uh using these skills, I do this a lot with dog training where sometimes the dog's brain works like this. Like they have to learn whatever it is you have to teach them. But if you do it in this way, like they can learn really quick. So they'll pick up on these patterns really fast. And sometimes it takes the human a little bit of extra time to get it. So the dog's like, come on, can you play a little bit quicker? And it's like, be like, okay, we're going to teach the dog some patience. I'm going to help you get through this right now, but it's important that you do it and not just like hand me the stuff and be like, can you do this? And it's like, okay, you got to get faster at this.
So
Oh,
you talk a lot about uh just kind of what you were alluding to there as far as like the right I don't even know if I want to say the right way directly, but a very good way to communicate with your dog and communicate and to just build that relationship where they're acting the way you need them or want them to act. And how do you use psychology? How do you go about it doesn't even have to be one thing. It can be multiple things that you do to cultivate that relationship and to help others to understand what they need to do.
yeah, there's a few principles that I follow. There's a lot of different tactics for training dogs, and I'll share a little story. One of an old roommate of mine when Bumblebee was growing up, I watched on camera because I was in a different room and I wanted to see what happened, but I watched on camera as my roommate kicked and punched my dog.
Ooh.
And it lit a fire inside of me. It made me realize that being a leader is more important than just getting results. And I went out there and we wrestled and I called the police and I don't we're not friends anymore after that experience. And um there's a lot to take out of dog training. There's three different ways you can train a dog. You can use punishment and intimidation. You can use bribes and incentives, and you can use growth and rewards. And all three work in their own way, but all come with their own consequences. And there's there was a moment in Bumble's life where I was just bribing and I had bought the best treats and he was sleeping in my bed and I was trying to give him as much love as I possibly could. And that bucket was full, but the communication bucket wasn't really full. And I had to learn how to communicate to him. So a couple of principles that I share with people are one, sequence. The secret is in the sequence, and it's it's when you see it, it's really obvious. There's a trigger, something happens, like someone knocks at the door, and then the behavior, your dog barks and runs at the door, or your dog goes to their bed, one or the other, or maybe anything in between. And then the consequence, it's this idea that humans and dogs are doing things for only two reasons, either to avoid pain or to gain pleasure. And sometimes the pain is your friend can't come inside. I remember when my friends would come over, they would knock and say, can Brady come play? And my mom would look at me and she goes, is your room clean? And if my room was clean, I'm all good. But if my room wasn't clean, I couldn't go play. And so that's painful to me because now I have to tell my friends, sorry, I can't go play. I have to go clean my room. And so she would be like, how are you going to play if your room's not clean? I'm like, I get it. I'm going to go clean it. This is my fault, you know? And so you want to set up elegant situations for your dog to learn and figure out how to navigate their situations and still have a lot of choice involved. It's like you could do this, right? But what if you do this? Wouldn't this be better? Don't you see how your friends come in faster than if you run to the door and then no one can come inside? And setting up situations for them to understand, or even being proactive. And I set up when I knock, if there's a knock at the door, I would just like knock around the house at first. I trained that to mean run to your bed. So I'm like anticipating someone knocking and they already understand, like when I hear a knock, I go to my bed. And so it's just setting up little things like that is how I use the psychology of one of is Pavlovian classical conditioning, and then the other one is operant conditioning, like ABA therapy, where you're basing what happens, you're shaping the dog based on this idea of pleasure and pain.
And you know, I am not a trainer of dogs by any stretch. I told you I believe before we started that I had to, and I did have two cats, and I'm down to one, but just my own personal experience, I'm relating to a lot of what you are saying, and I think just for me as a pet owner, I always like to try to understand their nature as well, and just what they need because I have been through some things with them. I shared these pets with somebody else before I got into my marriage here. And there was a point where my cat was not, uh, the nails weren't, taken care of, and he wasn't like neutered yet. I kept telling the other person that I really think we need to take them in and take care of this. We didn't,
Yeah.
and they wound up going after. So it was a boy cat and a girl cat. He started going after her because, well, he discovered his manhood, and I think the story about your friend where all that stuff went down, it made me think of this because that relationship was shattered, and I had to like rebuild and try to, once we did take care of his manhood and cut that off, I finally got my save there. And I wound up with them because I broke up with her and she even left them with me. I'm like, oh, well, they're better off with me. But yeah,
Both of them?
hmm,
You
pardon?
got both of them?
Yeah, I got both of them. Well, one of them just
Okay.
passed away recently,
Mm,
but
sorry.
uh, yeah, no, oh boy, that's a whole other episode there. Oof, that was painful. But
Yeah,
yeah, but
it is.
I I had to like re-socialize them and just get them to understand
How'd you
each
do it?
other. Pardon?
How did you do it?
That's a good question. I mean, it was a long time ago now, but I
Mm,
basically just got with one cat and maybe I used some treats or games and just tried to maybe show the other one that he was okay. And it was a very delicate reintroduction to where, I mean, they got along really great. After my former relationship, once we broke up, I mean, you never would have known there was a problem, which was amazing. And I don't, that's a good question. I don't even know how I did it. It was so long ago now. It was like 12, 13 years ago, but I
okay.
basically just re-socialized them and just very slowly didn't force it, but just I had to really focus on them and focus on their nature and try to understand their nature. And I'm probably getting a little off track to your point, but it
No,
what you
not at
were
all.
saying felt relevant and it made me think of all that. And it's important, the role you play as a trainer is really important.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll share a story a little bit later about a family that I helped where their dogs and their cats weren't getting along, and they had two cats and a dog, and there's a little bit of tension there. And I'll share some of the tips and tricks that I use to help them re-socialize because it is a interesting situation to navigate, and you want to make sure everyone's safe and everyone feels comfortable and everyone has their own space and um, or you like have to use a muzzle or a crate to make sure that there's barriers or boundaries in place. But anyway, we'll get into that a little bit later. But Yeah, it is a fun job being a dog trainer, and it's cool for how it relates. I'm the oldest of six, and I've gotten much more elegant in influencing dogs and people with how I communicate. And these skills are brilliant because you don't have to just use them for dogs. There's a wonderful book called Don't Shoot the Dog, and it talks about the practical implications of understanding these things to get your roommate to do their laundry or to pick up after themselves or to get your kid to move out of the house or your kids to stop screaming in the car, right? There's many ways you can handle problems. One of them is with physical pain and punishment, like I spoke about earlier. And it damages a lot of the relationship and it makes it harder to repair. And then there's more elegant ways like training an incompatible behavior or changing the motivation. So it's brilliant. But I say all this to let you know that uh, in our neighborhood, that our neighbors, their kids were outside, and my girlfriend was talking to our neighbor. And I'm a kid at heart. I have like this Rugrats sweatshirt that I love to wear around, and so they had their like this big ball that they were like throwing back and forth, like the brother and sister, and they were kind of having fun, but they looked kind of bored. And I was like, all right, we can make this more fun for sure, right? I was like, throw me the ball, and they're like, what? And I was like, throw me the ball, and they like threw it to me, and I caught it, and I was like, catch, and I threw it to the other kid, and he missed it at first, but he was like, okay, this is interesting, and he got the ball, and he like threw it to his sister, and she like missed it at first, and then I was like, throw it to me again, and then like she threw it to me again. I was like, catch. I threw it to him again, and this time he caught the ball. And we went around like this for a little while before I was like, all right, now we're going to go over here. And then they were listening to me a little bit more because I connected and appreciated their world. And then we moved away a little bit. So we had some more space. I was like, all right, no hands now, only feet. Now we're playing soccer. Okay. So now I changed the rules on them. So now I'm testing like Simon Says in a way. And so they put the ball on the ground and we start kicking in. I know they both play soccer too. So they understand these rules already. And we kick it a few times, and then now I start to show off, and I start kicking the ball like really high and really far, and I start proving a couple points. And I played sports growing up, so a great one is, are you faster than the ball? Right. And this shows like teamwork. Is it better for you just to pick up the ball and run it from me to you, or can you just kick it and pass it to someone, and you save a lot of time and a lot of energy? So then we got the sister on one side and the brother on one side, and I got the ball, and I was like, all right, I'll give you a head start, go. And she starts running, and I kick the ball, and sure enough, it beats her there. And she's like, all right, let me do it again. And I was like, all right, come on, let's do it again. Let's do it further this time. And so we backed up, like doubled space. And I gave her a big head start, and I kicked in. I beat her again. And she's like, oh, man, what the heck? And I was like, what did you learn? She's like, oh, the ball's way faster. And so it shows like working as a team for these things. And finally, I kicked the ball really high and it got stuck in the tree.
Oh
And
wow.
their faces, right? Their faces went immediate to like shocked and disappointed. And they looked at me to see what I was going to do. And I was just laughing. And I was like, oh, this is great. This is another adventure. We got to get this ball down because you know how many balls I got stuck in the tree? Like the other day, I climbed our tree in the backyard to get a dog toy down because I threw it in the tree on accident.
Oh boy.
Um, so they look at me and they see me laughing, and then they start laughing and they're like, "All right, what do we do?" And I was like, "All right, we're gonna get a broom." And so we went and found a broom and we like got the ball out of the tree, and then we continued playing. And then as we were playing, one of the kids he fell and like cut his hand a little bit. He tripped and he started crying, and I was like, "Can I see it?" And he like showed me his thumb, and I was like, oh man, what color blood is that? Like, how red is that? And he like started looking at it. I was like, that looks like really healthy blood, man. That means you're
Oh
really
boy.
strong. And he was like, he was like, huh? I was like, man, that's the strongest color blood that I've ever seen in a while, man. Like, whew, that's tough. And he just like started smiling and looking, and then of course he had to go tell his mom, which is still talking to my girlfriend. And now we get into like, how do you communicate to mom, right? And I was like, okay, follow my lead. What we're gonna do is we're just gonna go stand next to her. We're not gonna say anything, but just us standing there looking at her, she's gonna eventually look at us, and we're gonna tell her what happened. And we went over there and we like stood and we looked at her, and eventually she looked at us, and we're like, and we showed her his thumb, and I was like, look at how, like, look at that color of blood. Isn't that like isn't he super strong? And he's like, oh wow, that's super strong. We should go get some band-aids and make sure we clean this up and make sure it's all healthy and you stay super strong. And these are all this story, a lot of it comes from dog training. And what I do with dogs is very similar. And we're playing a game typically, right? If it's like touching your nose to my hand or bringing me a toy or sitting or laying down or rolling over, and then we're relating to each other. Like if there's a mistake made, they look at me and they're like, how are you going to respond? Right. And if I just laugh it off and be like, that's okay, man, like I get it, we're just learning this thing, like let's reset and let's do this again. And if something happens, right, just being able to take a breath and ask myself, like, how do I want to be remembered as a leader?
And you actually have a few videos on your YouTube page that demo some of these things. Like I know I one of them that I watched was the nose example that you just described, I believe.
Oh yeah, I think I just posted that.
Yeah, yeah, I just watched it. So
Yeah, brilliant.
it sounds like you so I feel like there is a connection here because you seem like you have a real good mindset and have a real good understanding of what you want your business to be about. And you have a lot of good philosophies, but I know that you didn't come into this like, okay, I have a structure, I have a business plan. You didn't come into this with any of that. So, talk a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about learning and understanding what you needed to do in order to turn this into a full-time business.
Yeah, get more organized and develop some standard operating procedures, right? And also becoming very clear on my mission and who it is that I'm helping and how I help them and with what specific problem I help with. So I empower problem puppies, dogs, and their owners to have more success at home and around town while having fun. And that was me 6 years ago, right? I was struggling at home. I had a problem child who was leaving accidents that I didn't want, gifts that I didn't want, right? And I had to learn from someone else. And developing the business part of it, right? There's the learning how to dog train, and then there's like the marketing part, which is interesting. I've spent bunches of money on Google ads and Facebook ads, and I've got burned a few times. And then I've paid someone who knows what they're doing, and I've got new clients. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like these things do work if you like know what you're doing in a sense. So I've learned some lessons the hard way because I'm the oldest and I like to learn through pain sometimes and make some mistakes and be like, okay, well, I shouldn't do that again because that costs me a little bit of money. And from there, partnering with business people to help and I can ask questions from, like having coaches is helpful. And then understanding my value systems and like what it takes for me to get my cup fulfilled because like I'm not always a dog trainer. Like a dog training is just a hat that I put on. So separating business and life, like we were talking about earlier, is important too because dogs, we have two dogs of our own. They're alive 24/7, right? So they're constantly changing and growing. And you got to be able to like take some time away from them and give them their nap time and you step away and you breathe. And then I go and work on the tech wizard stuff of building a website or the marketing or the copying part and using ChatGPT and helping me write new copy and email marketing. And there's lots of parts to it, but they're good problems to have. And I'd rather be doing this than working in and out.
Yeah, I mean, all respect in the world to anybody working in retail or fast food, but those are tough businesses to be in. There's a reason that I worked as hard as I did to remove myself from those type of industries. They're
Yeah.
tough. So one thing that you mentioned was values. So I don't want to sound like a corporation start asking you about values, but I'm going to do it anyway, I guess. So if you can, because it sounds like you need a certain set of values to train dogs and to especially be that leader to help people to understand their pet and to train them as well. What, if you can you think of any values offhand that really define what your business is about?
Yeah, most definitely. I feel the top ones are healthy and vital. You have to make sure that you got nutrition, you're going on walks, you're getting those things taken care of, and the dog is feeling safe and secure in those areas. You can't go anywhere without those. And for me too, I got to make sure that I'm healthy and vital. I'm drinking water and my protein shakes because if I don't, I get grumpy, and then that messes up my second value, which is being loving and warm. So if I can look at things from the perspective of like love and warmth rather than like frustration or embarrassment, right? Those are some of my moving away from values. Like I embarrassment and frustration, those are challenging to reach because I've set them up that way now. And my moving towards value, though, healthy and idle, loving and warm, and then gratitude, really taking the moment to find the gratitude in the problems. And you're right, employees, Tiffany and Co., In and Out, like all these places that I worked at, they had different problems. And everyone has problems, and you get to choose your problems. That is one of the benefits of life. The only people who don't have problems are those in cemeteries. So problems are actually a sign of life. And I feel that uh, my values with having healthy and vitality, loving and warmth, gratitude, and then intelligence. That's an interesting one. I mentioned like having coaches and asking questions. Before, I would want to do everything by myself, and that's just not very intelligent. And that means you have to learn all the lessons by yourself, which takes more time. And I'm more about compressing decades into days. And I'm a big Tony Robbins and Ed Milet and Russell Brunson and Tim Ferriss, like I mentioned before. So being intelligent and not just reading those books, but then asking someone else's opinion on like, what do you think about this? And having an intelligent conversation about like, what should I do in my business? Because now I'm talking to other podcasters about franchising or like opening up other locations or not expanding or like online stuff or speaking. And like, there's lots of ways you could go and just getting other opinions and having options. You don't have a choice unless you have three options. So making sure that I have three options before I make choices is another important, intelligent decision.
So you talked a little bit about problems, and in your line of work, you're dealing with dogs and people. What kind of problems have you run into, and what did you do, especially with your wealth of leadership skills and just your perspective on life? You have such a great outlook. How do you deal with problems so that you wind up with a good positive resolution?
Yeah, I'll share this story and I'll share a little bit more of the story than I normally do. I got hired at a dog training facility, and when I got hired, I explained to them how I train and like what I do and blah blah blah. And they're like, "We're totally on board. Like, you're our only trainer here. We're totally fine with that." And when I got there, I was in training, and then I saw that they were using e-collars and stuff, and I was like, "I don't use those." And they're like, "Okay, that's fine, but we still have some owners here from our last location that want to use them." And I was like, "All right, whatever. They can do whatever they want, but I'm not using them. I just want you to know this." And it was fine for a little bit, but then we got a dog to train and they wanted to put an e-collar on it. And I was like, I'm not putting an e-collar on this dog. This dog already doesn't like to play with toys. It's already aggressive towards people and other dogs. It doesn't really like treats and eating things. It really doesn't like anything besides just being on its own. Putting an e-collar on this dog isn't going to help this dog. And we eventually went different ways, and I left that facility, but I continued training with this dog. And she hired me. They hired another trainer to use an e-collar. She trusted them. She said it went terribly. So she left them, and then she contacted me and we started working together again. And so I went over to her house to kind of reassess the situation and see what was going on, if I could get any more information. And the dog was having problems with the cats, like I mentioned earlier. She was being aggressive towards other dogs. She didn't really like many things. She would play her own games. Like her favorite game was uh, the humans chase her. She would just run away from them all the time. And it was a huge game for her of catch me if you can. So I went over to this house, and the first thing I noticed, I grew up in a big house that was messy a lot of the times, but this house was messy and it was very tightly packed. This is in San Diego. The houses are it was small and like everything was a little congested. And I was like, well, that kind of raises the tension and anxiety like almost immediately. Even for myself, I'm like trying to squeeze through boxes and stuff, and the dogs and cats are too. And I mentioned that the game, her favorite game to play was Catch Me If You Can. And she also didn't get along with the cats, and she didn't really like food. And like food feeding time, they would all eat next to each other, and she would growl at the cats if they came over to the food. And then she would sometimes eat the cat's tuna. And it was a whole thing, right? So you could tell that there were some parts that were misaligned. And we haven't even got to like the actual dog training yet, you know? So the first thing we had them do was to like clean up the house and give the dogs their own space. And so they have their own safe space. And that's why the place and crate training is very important, because they have their own space. And then we changed the game from we chase you to you chase us. So we went outside with her, and she immediately took off in the backyard and started running around, grabbed her toy. And then we ran back inside and we started having a party. And then of course she like was like, "What's all that noise?" And she ran up to the back door and was like, "Guys, you're supposed to chase me." And then we opened the door again and she took off. And then we shut the door and we started having a party inside again and celebrating. And then she was like, "Oh, what the heck?" And we did this a few times before she was like, "It's painful running away from you. I'd rather stay with you." And I was like, "Okay, great. Now let's change this game. Now you're going to chase us around." And so we changed that association in our head of what that means. And then the cats, we knew she liked tuna. So we got a gate and we put a gate between them, and we got tuna. And on one side of the gate, we would give her some tuna. On the other side of the gate, we would give the cats tuna. And it was a special time of the day where like the timer went off, and they were set up to do this feeding time like this with the cats and dogs. And doing it every day, giving them their own spaces and separating their eating places, they were able to see each other be totally fine, because now we're associating like see their face get tuna, see their face get tuna. Like this is a positive association instead of like these cats are trying to take my food. It's like, no, we share our food. There's tons. We live in abundance. There's tons to go around. Like we got more tuna than you can even imagine. And we got grocery stores full of them. Like picture that. And changing these associations too. That was a very interesting problem to handle. And we did a lot of it just by changing the environment in some ways, and then changing the associations of what games you play with your dogs. And there was more games we played too, but those were some of the big turning points in this dog.
That's an amazing story. I mean, it's so important. And again, I don't want to come off like I'm the expert here because I'm not, but just based on my experiences with dogs and even my cats, which I had for almost half my life, I mean, sometimes the environment goes a long way, and the example you set goes a long way. And this kind of leads me to another question. I know we're starting to get a little thin on time with all the storytelling, but can
Okay.
other animals learn like dogs? Because I noticed some
Mm.
similarities between dog, like my cat experiences and your dog experiences, but cats and dogs are different. People are different from, all animals. I mean, what's your take on that?
This is a great question. I'll stay longer to talk about this. Uh, I think about the prefrontal cortex, and that's kind of your decision making part of your brain. And cats, there's about like 8 or 9% of their brain. Dogs are about like 12 or 13. Pigs are like 12, 13, 14%. They're just around right there with it with dogs. Guinea pigs, obviously, much smaller. But the brilliant thing is when you're working with principles, all animals learn. It's how animals survive, right? It's Darwinism. Like you have to figure out how to survive, and these animals figure out where food is, and food is just a trigger, which is probably sends off a scent, and the animals, the behavior is like go get this food, and then I bring it back. That's a behavior. That's a pretty complex behavior if you think about it too. There's a lot of things going on that you're not even comprehending right now. Ants are very intricate animals, and they're still learning. So you can train animals. I have two guinea pigs, and you can train them to touch their nose to a little target. And it's how they train dolphins at SeaWorld and other places to do things. They train them to touch a ball on the end of a stick. And then they can raise the ball up, and the dolphins will jump up and try to touch it and do a flip in the air. And that's how they train them to start doing flips underwater and stuff. So you can train any animal to target anything. I've seen goldfish be trained to target. You could like tap on the water, and the goldfish will like, and then drop like a piece of food, and the goldfish will swim over to you, and so you tap over here, and the goldfish will come, and then you drop a piece of food, and then soon enough you don't got to drop food. You can just tap on the water, and your goldfish just knows how to come when called. Now it's like the most mind blowing thing. And then you get a hula hoop, and you put a hula hoop out, and you tap on the other side, and it goes to the hula hoop, and now you have a goldfish who goes to hula hoops. And the same thing with guinea pigs, right? You can train them to do the same things. So all animals can learn. I believe in if principles, right? Like I mentioned, so there's techniques. Some dog trainers use techniques, and I was like, well, if that technique doesn't work on a cow or a potbelly pig, which weighs 500 pounds, like I'm not going to put an e-collar on a potbelly pig or a prong collar to like get them to move around. It's much more humane to teach them to touch their nose to a target and then to walk over here, put the target over here, and they walk over here. It works way easier, and it works for both sides, right? It's not just me being a big strong leader telling them what to do. It's like, hey, can we work together to get over here because this is for your health? Like I want to help you. So did that answer your
That's
question?
that's no, that's amazing. That's exactly what I wanted to know because I as you know, I had a dog growing up, and I knew that dog. We were both the same age, so we like grew up together. Then I had another dog, and then I had the cats for a real long time. I still have one of them. So I'm more relating, I think, to the cats than like those experiences. So I
Yeah.
thought it would be interesting to get your take since you're the dog expert, but you obviously have a lot of knowledge with all different types of animals. And just coming to towards the end here, I just want to ask what is next for you in your business, and how can people find you, and how can they work with you?
Yeah. For your cats, first off, like I like thinking about this, you can just buy a target stick on Amazon and start training them to touch this thing, and they get quite proficient. And clicker training is known to work on all sorts of different animals too. So that's the tip and trick for the day. To find me, I'm teaching my littlest puppy Curiosity, who's 8 months or 9 months old now, how to ride a skateboard. So we're like 28 days into it now. And I went on Amazon and I bought a kid skateboard. And this skateboard I thought was going to be half the size of a regular skateboard. It's like a quarter of the size. It's very small, but we're utilizing it anyways. I had like a balance board, so I taught her on that first, and now she's balancing on this little skateboard. And now her new skateboard's coming in. So I always wanted a dog who could ride a skateboard. And so I'm teaching her how to ride that. So my big call to action is follow us on TikTok or Instagram at N as in Nancy, D as in Drew dog training. That's ND dog training, and watch us, give us a follow. I do a little bit of talking and dog training in the middle too, and I'm sharing podcast clips and other things about dog training there. So, and if you want to be part, I'm starting a book club with one of the books I mentioned, Don't Shoot the Dog. Message me on Instagram if you want to be part of that. You can DM me book club, and I'll send you the access link for that. Or if you just want a PDF with some dog training tips and tricks, you can just message me Dream Dog, and I'll send that your way too.
And I can vouch for your social media. I watched a bunch of clips and was surfing around. I don't know if people say surfing the internet. I guess I'm old, but I
I use it still.
I browsed around pretty much prepping, and I think what you're doing is great. It's great content. Your mindset and philosophy is awesome, and thank you so much for being on Mark My Words today. I had a blast, and I wish you all the best in the future. I think your business is just gonna grow more and more from here. And this is Brady Foulk of New Direction Dog Training, and thanks for being on Mark My Words.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I'm Mark Schmidt. We're going to leave with the confetti, and I will see you all next time. Bye for now. Thanks again for taking time out of your busy day to listen to Mark My Words. If you would like to connect with me beyond the show, you can find me on LinkedIn at Mark Schmidt, where I will be talking about entrepreneurship, careers, and anything else that is on my mind. You can also connect with me on Twitter and Instagram at Nimrod1979 and Nimrod79 respectively. This podcast also has a page on Instagram at Mark My Words. And finally, if you want to leave me a voicemail or check out what I'm up to with the podcast, come find me at podpage.com/mark-my-words. Thanks again for listening, and I'll be back with a new episode soon. Bye for now.